So my name is Cristofalo. I am Churches for Middle East Peace's Senior Director of Advocacy and Government Relations, and I'm coming to you today from our Washington, D.C. office on Capitol Hill. For those of you who might not be familiar with the work of CMEP, I think many of you are, but for those watching who might not be, Churches for Middle East Peace is a coalition of over 30 national Christian denominations and organizations that encompass most of the mainline Protestant churches, historic peace churches, Catholic, Orthodox, some evangelical expressions. And our goal is to help educate U.S. Christians on what's occurring in the Middle East, with particular attention to Israel-Palestine, to help advocate for U.S. government policies that will bring about a just and lasting end to conflicts in the Middle East. And our work really focuses on three sort of focal priority areas: holistic peace building, humanitarian and economic assistance, and human rights issues. And so today we are launching a webinar series that focuses mostly on that last advocacy priority of human rights issues. So over the next several weeks, we will be delving into a 5-part mini-series featuring stories from several notable Palestinian Christian cases currently making their way through the challenges, injustices, and frustrations of the legal system under occupation. And so we wanted to start our series by giving a bit of an overview. We'll hear directly in the coming weeks from Palestinians who are impacted either by the possibility of land annexation or have experienced issues of administrative detention within the Israeli military court system, prison system. And so we wanted to start by giving a broad overview of the underpinning of this system. And we thought there was no better way to begin, but with our speaker today, Jessica Montell, who has a long career as a human rights leader within Jerusalem and Israel. She has served as the executive director of HaMoked since 2017, and prior to that, for 13 years, served as the executive director of B'Tselem, the premier Israeli human rights organization. She's received a number of awards over the years, and her bio, I'm sure we can also, full bio we can put in the chat box, but she's received numerous awards over the years, has written and is a frequent speaker and commentator on human rights and international humanitarian law and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and is the author of Learning from What Works: Strategic Analysis of the Achievements of the Israel-Palestine Human Rights Community. She holds a master's in international affairs from Columbia University and a BA from Oberlin College. She'll speak a bit more, I'm sure, on HaMoked and their work, but just briefly, HaMoked, which is Hebrew for focal point, which actually I did not know until just now, so we learn things even from hosting these webinars, is an Israeli-based human rights non-government organization that aims to assist Palestinians living under Israeli occupation. It was founded in 1988 during the outbreak of the First Intifada. And Jessica will be able to talk a bit more about the work that they have been doing. So I wanted to first just start again by thanking you, Jessica, and passing it over to give a brief introduction and also share a bit about HaMoked's work sort of overall.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. It's a good opportunity to speak to you. HaMoked, as you said, means focal point or hotline. And HaMoked is a human rights organization, Israeli human rights organization with a focus on individual legal assistance. So we are providing free legal aid to over 5,000 people every year. And through the individual assistance, trying to make more structural change. So the individual cases, both to help people with day-to-day really pressing needs, but also looking for how individual cases can be strategic litigation to push for policy change. And as you said, HaMoked was founded in 1988. Initially, the name of the organization was the Hotline for Victims of Violence. And the emphasis was on issues of violence by security officials, violence by settlers, and the issue of prisoners, of detentions of Palestinians. Detentions has continued to be a theme and a strategic priority for the organization since our founding. But over the years, as more and more Palestinians came and asked for assistance in different ways, the organization has changed. What we are working on has changed very dramatically. And I think that change speaks to the heart of what is occupation. Today, the majority of HaMoked's work relates to what I would call the permit bureaucracy of occupation. So a lot of our work is about freedom of movement and residency rights, all of the ways that Palestinians from the West Bank, from East Jerusalem, from Gaza need permits to live in their home, to travel freely within the occupied territories. All of that very hostile permit bureaucracy to do things that we Israelis and probably you all take for granted. So today, HaMoked, and since the war in Gaza this past year, prisoners' issues, both the detentions in the West Bank and in Gaza, are a huge volume of the people who are calling us, and it's maybe 10 times more people have called us this year compared to the previous year, looking for loved ones who have been arrested, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. And we are also continuing on these issues of the permit bureaucracy. We have the olive harvest coming up, a really important season economically and culturally for Palestinians. And we are supporting thousands of people who can't get access to their farmlands because they're on the other side of the separation wall, this wall that Israel built mostly in the West Bank. So these kinds of issues, both on the individual level and as a way to be pushing for more strategic change. And what I would also say that maybe is unique about HaMoked is that almost all of our work is within the Israeli legal system, which is more challenging than ever before, but surprisingly effective on the individual cases. I mean, Kyle mentioned my research about the impact, what we can learn about the impact of the human rights community, the research that I did several years ago. And one of the surprising conclusions of that research is that, in fact, domestic litigation, I mean, it's very frustrating. We lose a lot of cases, but in fact, it's one of the most effective tools we have to be advancing human rights. So I think I'll stop there and happy to get into the conversation.
Thanks, Jessica. Sorry, I was just writing down some notes because there are questions that are percolating even from that initial intro that you gave that we'll get to. And so just again, reminding folks that you can use the Q&A box in the Zoom to type up some questions, and we hope to get to a few by the end of the time together. So as I mentioned, this is the first part of our series that we're looking at over the next several weeks, where we'll examine cases both within Jerusalem, Israel, and the West Bank. And so I wanted to start our conversation by asking you, what are some of the differences between how the legal system treats Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, those that have Jerusalem IDs, and those that are West Bank residents? Can you tell us a bit about how those categories of identification, can you tell us a bit about those identification types as well?
Yes, I say sometimes if two Palestinians meet each other for the first time in Washington, D.C., within the first 2 minutes of the conversation, one will ask the other, what color is your ID card? And what color is your ID card? Because, you know, the Israeli ID, as opposed to the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, you know, those four categories, so many of a person's rights, basic rights and privileges are dictated by the color of that ID card. So Palestinian citizens of Israel formally have the same rights as Israeli Jews. We are facing, with this very extreme government, and particularly over the past year, a lot of incitement even racism, ministers that are targeting citizens of Israel. I mean, very harsh punishments for people on charges of incitement. But nominally, I would say even more than nominally, citizens of Israel, Jews and Arabs, are governed by the same legal system. So Palestinian citizens of Israel are subject to the same legal system that I, as an Israeli Jewish citizen of Israel, am subject to. And then you have East Jerusalem Palestinians, and Israel, right after 1967, annexed East Jerusalem. So Israeli law applies here. I'm sitting in my office in East Jerusalem. Israeli law applies here, but the Palestinians who live here are permanent residents of Israel rather than citizens. I also say frequently, I mean, the phrases that we use, when Israelis call something permanent, it's often not permanent. And when they call something temporary, it's often not temporary. I mean, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza is called a temporary occupation, but we know that the Israeli government has no intention of ending it anytime. And this permanent residency, this legal status of East Jerusalem Palestinians, in fact, is a very vulnerable status, a status that can be taken away. An East Jerusalem Palestinian who moves to the United States for a few years is at risk of losing their residency. But still, East Jerusalem Palestinians have some of the privileges of being legal residents of Israel in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of some social welfare benefits. The main difference between residents and citizens is that they don't have voting rights. I mean, they're not Israelis in the sense that they can take part in the political system. And when you're talking about West Bank Palestinians, they are living under Israeli military rule. If you go to the West Bank, you have a very clear, different experience going to an Israeli Jewish settlement as opposed to a Palestinian community. Israeli settlements that look and feel like Israel, but in fact, they also are under military law. I mean, there is a lot of blurring of the distinction between the Israel and the West Bank. But in fact, the West Bank was never annexed. It's not part of the state of Israel. The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, does not pass law in the West Bank. The military commander is responsible for making and enforcing the laws. I mean, all three branches of government, the legislator, the executive, and the judiciary are all military bodies in the West Bank. So, Palestinians are living under military rule with no ability to be, no voice in setting policies of that body. And the Israeli military is very explicitly, although legally the framework for international humanitarian law, the military is responsible for its own security needs and the welfare of the occupied population. I mean, to put it in just one sentence, the responsibilities of the occupying power, its own security, it's legitimate for the military to take measures necessary for its own security, and it's obligated to take measures for the welfare of the occupied, the Palestinian population. But in practice, the military's role is all about protecting the Israeli settler population, which should not be in occupied territory at all. And a lot of the issues that I know that you're going to be focusing on over the next few weeks are linked to human rights violations that result from the presence of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and the very harmful implications of settlements for the Palestinian population.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm wondering if you could delve a little bit deeper into how the Israeli justice system enables, you already started to tease some of this out, but how does the Israeli justice system enable things like land annexations and forcible displacements? We often hear, international law and things being illegal under international law, but what underpins the ability of the Israeli justice system to enable these types of actions?
So in the West Bank, again, it's not the Israeli justice system, it's the military justice system. Theoretically, it should be very distinct. But because of the presence of settlers there, it has, and the ideological agenda of this government, but it's, of many years of governments to be entrenching Israeli control and not only military, but civil control in the West Bank and using the resources of the West Bank for the benefit of Israelis, right? I mean, housing, as well as the water resources, as well as quarries, other resources in the West Bank that are being exploited for the benefit of Israelis at the expense of Palestinians. In terms of the legal system, the most clear manifestation of occupation is that you have military courts. Palestinians are being tried in military courts rather than Israeli civil courts. Again, settlers in the West Bank theoretically are also under military law. It should be the case that anyone who is suspected of committing an offense, a crime in the West Bank would be tried in military courts. But because of the political cost to trying Israeli Jews in military courts, then they've come up with this, workaround where Israeli Jews are tried in civil courts. And then what that means is in this exact same area, I mean, any of the people on this call who have been to Hebron, the city of Hebron, say, where you have Jewish settlers living exactly next door to Palestinians, a Jewish boy and a Palestinian boy who commit the exact same crime on the exact same street, right? Throwing stones that might injure somebody. The Palestinian boy will be tried, arrested, detained, tried in military court. The Jewish settler boy, if he's arrested at all, I mean, often there is just no law enforcement when it comes to Palestinian settlers who commit violence against Palestinians. But if that settler child is arrested for the offense, he will be tried in Israeli civil court. And then all of the due process rights are different when it comes to military court as opposed to the civil court. How long you can be held before you have to be brought before a judge. Your right to have access to an attorney. Military court proceedings are conducted in Hebrew, a language that Palestinians do not understand. The ability to be using secret evidence to be convicting people. I mean, a whole long list of procedural problems that make military courts much less just when it comes to the rights of defendants in those courts.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to ask one last question for now, and then we'll shift. I know that there are a few within the Q&A box, but you mentioned in your opening about the importance of October and the olive harvest season for Palestinian farmers. And this is something that you mentioned HaMoked works on very closely. Wondering if you could give us just a quick, a little bit more information of what challenges face farmers during and landowners around this time, and how does it sort of connect to the broader restrictions on Palestinians' freedom of movement?
Yes, and thank you for this question, because, so much of what we are dealing with, I mean, there's a lot of news this year. I mean, really dramatic headlines. And then so much of the daily violations, I mean, things that are happening that should be headline news, that really are dramatic and very serious. There's no bandwidth for those issues. And one of those is the separation wall, which Israel built 20 years ago, mostly inside the West Bank. So it's about 10% of the West Bank Palestinians don't have access to. About 10% of the West Bank is on the other side of the wall, and Palestinians need special permits to get access to those areas. And 20 years ago, Israel made a lot of promises that everyone who needs access would have, everyone would get permits. There are special gates that would be open, whenever people need to cross. As I said, HaMoked has supported about 1,000 farmers over these past 20 years, just trying to navigate that really difficult permit bureaucracy to get access to lands on the other side of the wall. But since last October 7th, since the Hamas attack on the communities inside Israel, all of that area, what's called the seam zone, has been shut down. There's no access at all for any Palestinian from the West Bank to be entering lands on the other side of the wall for agricultural reasons. I mean, we were able, through some litigation in the courts, we got a few of the gates open, we got a few permits issued for some farmers, but now the olive harvest opening this week, tens of thousands of Palestinians would like to get access to their lands. I mean, this is a source of livelihood. This, 1 month period to harvest the olives is, a year's livelihood is dependent on this harvest season. So it's really crucial. And we have petitioned the court several times. What they have said is after the Jewish holidays, they will evaluate whether or not, to what extent the olive harvest can take place. So we're really, along with the families and the communities that we support, are on pins and needles, whether or not the olive harvest will be able to take place. And particularly now when the Palestinian economy is, really in dire straits, the harvest is more important than ever. So this is an issue, I mean, we are trying to put on a very crowded agenda with so many issues that we need to be concerned about, to try and raise the profile of this issue.
Thanks, Jessica. And I know that many folks within CMEP's network, when they travel to Israel-Palestine, one of the pilgrimage trips often happens around olive harvesting. And so many have had the experiences of walking alongside Palestinian farmers in this season. And so it's important for us to continue to raise this and to learn about the ways that HaMoked is walking alongside these farmers as well in the legal realm. Just one last quick follow-up. So if they say after the Jewish holidays, when do we expect an answer? Is that within the next week, 2 weeks, month? What would that look like?
Yes. So the Jewish holidays end on the 25th of October. So we have another 2 weeks. And then some people have already gotten permits for the following week. So starting on the 27th of October. But there are two questions. One, how many people are getting permits? Because it's not enough that just the landowner gets a permit. This is it takes a village to harvest olive groves. People need, extended families, cousins, everyone is pitching in for the harvest. So we are worried that only a few, let's say a few thousand permits will be issued rather than the tens of thousands that are needed. And the second concern is around the opening of the gates. You have about 50 gates in the separation wall. Traditionally during a harvest, all of them would be open. They need to be open every day. They're not open all day. They open at, in the morning for 15 minutes. People can go in, again in midday, again at night, but that's, the minimum. So the devil a little bit is in the details. The fear is that there would be some very symbolic harvest, right? They would open for a week or two for a few thousand people. And, we are trying to make the High Court of Justice, which is monitoring this issue, understand that that's not going to be enough. Always I say a lot of what Israel is doing in terms of violating human rights is justified. They claim it's necessary for security. And now more than ever, after October 7th, of course, we are all very concerned about our security, us as Israeli citizens. So it's an even more difficult time to be pushing the High Court to be asking hard questions. I mean, you cannot deny tens of thousands of people access to their own lands in the West Bank on security grounds. But what they're saying is they're going to evaluate whether, the situation is calm enough to allow the olive harvest. I mean, it hasn't been calm, all year. And for that reason, we are particularly concerned.
Yeah, and of course, I know that the opening and the permits is the main, area that you all are focused on, but the other element is what challenges they might face from radical settlers or others who might try to inflict harm or attack the farms as well. So that's of course another challenge that we know.
Yes. I mean, those are the two big concerns around the olive harvest is lands that are on the other side of the wall that HaMoked is dealing with, and huge tracts of olive groves around very militant, extremist, violent settlements. And those areas, Palestinians need a military escort to be harvesting those groves. Will the military enable harvesting in those areas? Almost every year there are very violent incidents from these extremist settlers attacking Palestinian groves. So you're right that those are the two areas of concern.
Great. Well, we'll transition to some questions from the audience. So a reminder, you can continue to put stuff in the Q&A. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left in our time together this afternoon, evening. So there was a question about, is there any pathway to citizenship, Israeli citizenship for Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem? Was there such a path in the immediate aftermath of the 1967 war?
Yes, a good question. Palestinian permanent residents are able to apply for citizenship. You have, I think it's 300,000 about Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem, and I think the figure is about less than 10,000 are citizens. So, and you have both an ideological reason for Palestinians not wanting to ask for citizenship. I mean, some who see asking for citizenship as recognizing the legitimacy of the Israeli occupation in East Jerusalem, but also you have Palestinians trying to get citizenship who are facing a lot of obstacles. So without taking, and this is not an issue that HaMoked works on, helping Palestinians get citizenship, but the private lawyers that are doing this work, I mean, there's no way to navigate the process without paying a lawyer a lot of money to be, pushing to at every step of the way, because there are a lot of obstacles. In East Jerusalem, there is a very explicit demographic agenda to a lot of Israel's policies. So the idea is to be encouraging as much as possible the growth of the Israeli Jewish population and restricting as much as possible the Palestinian population. And the way they are restricting the Palestinian population, one, through urban planning means, I mean, restricting construction, home demolitions. I'm sure you've all heard about demolition of Palestinian homes because they were built without permits, although it's virtually impossible for Palestinians to receive permits. And then issues of residency and citizenship are the other side of that, the second tool to be restricting the growth of the Palestinian population.
Thanks, Jessica. And I guess adding to that, and I don't know if you have anything to expound upon in this regard, it also is the case that in East Jerusalem, Palestinian might marry a West Bank Palestinian, and that has a whole host of challenges in terms of where they can live, and what that the West Bank Palestinian won't be able to move to East Jerusalem, and so how that impacts their ability to maintain that residency, or if they want to.
Yes, and this is a big project of HaMoked. I mean, as I said, the bureaucracy of freedom of movement and residency rights is, maybe 75% of what HaMoked is doing. And this issue of The Israeli ban on Palestinian family unification is a major area of our work. So you have about 10,000 families in East Jerusalem that Israel calls mixed marriages. A mixed marriage is a Palestinian from East Jerusalem married to a Palestinian from the West Bank. I mean, it literally could be you marry your neighbor down the street. But because the border of Jerusalem, what was annexed to Israel, runs down that street, then that's a mixed marriage. And then Israel denies any residency status to the West Bank spouse. So after a long legal battle, we were able to get for families a military permit. So the West Bank spouse, they don't have any residency in Jerusalem. I mean, they could live 10, 20, 30 years in Jerusalem. They own a home, they work here, but all they have is a military stay permit that has to be renewed every year. And then there are all sorts of ways that people can lose that permit. So if I said that the East Jerusalem residency status is a vulnerable status, that West Bank spouse is in an even more vulnerable status, and that's one of the main populations that HaMoked is supporting in Jerusalem.
Thanks. The next one's a bit of an easier, just logistic question of what are you mentioned the colors of the cards for the different residents, the East Jerusalem, West Bank. This also says Gaza, but I don't, that's a different situation. So if you could just quickly remind us.
Yes. So my ID and the ID also of East Jerusalem Palestinians are blue, and the West Bank ID and also the Gaza is green.
Thanks. I had another question that I wanted to ask. So I'm just going to take the moderatorial discretion to do so. You talked about the permit bureaucracy, as that is one of the main challenges that HaMoked has to work through. I'm wondering if you could let us know what, if anything, has shifted since October 7th and this current war. Is it, worse, the same? I mean, we would imagine that it's worse, but perhaps it's always been so bad that it's hard to get worse. I'm just curious, sort of, what have you seen, and anything else you might have seen sort of shifted since October 7th?
Yes. So some things are exactly the same and some things are a lot worse. I mean, when we talk about this, the freeze on Palestinian family unification, the need for these East Jerusalem families to constantly be renewing their ID cards, that has more or less stayed the same. But we were supporting Gaza families, humanitarian access to Gaza prior, a year and two ago. Of course, that has completely halted. And instead of helping families enter Gaza for these humanitarian visits, we have been working frantically all year to get people out of Gaza, people who are trapped in the fighting. The issues of freedom of movement inside the West Bank have gotten much worse. I mean, both the fact that all of the gates to cross the separation wall have been closed this past year, but also within the West Bank, all sorts of new obstacles, restrictions on using roads, checkpoints. So that has also gotten a lot worse. And then I said the main area that HaMoked has been working on since 1988 to today is prisoners' rights. And that has really deteriorated very dramatically. You have twice as many Palestinians incarcerated now as you did compared to a year ago, prior to October 7th, 2023. You have a very dramatic increase in detentions without trial. So administrative detention, and I know that's one of the issues you're going to be focusing on. You now have, it's over 40%, it's over 10,000 Palestinians in detention, whereas a year ago it was 5,000. And 40% of Palestinians held now are in detention without trial, either administrative detention if it's West Bank Palestinians, or under what is called the unlawful combatants law for Gazans. Again, people held without being charged, without being brought to trial, solely on the basis of secret evidence that they don't have access to. So this kind of detention without trial that under international law should be really a rare exception is in fact very standard. I mean, now again, 40% of Palestinians who are being held are not charged with anything and are being held solely on the basis of this classified information that they don't get to see.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, we are nearing the end of our time this afternoon, evening, and so I wanted to just give you the opportunity, Jessica, if there are any sort of final comments you'd like to make, and then we'll close this session.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think I want to zoom out a little bit and try not to end on such a demoralizing note. I mean, the situation really is dire. Worse, I've been doing this kind of work for 20 years. It's the worst that it's ever been. And still you have on the ground Israeli and Palestinian human rights activists, peace activists, working, on all of these different issues, the fighting in Gaza, pushing for, an urgent ceasefire, advocating for a deal to release the hostages, getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, and also calling out human rights violations in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and against citizens of Israel. So there is a lot of work being done on the ground. And of course, we can't do this work without partnerships with you all. I mean, I think maybe one silver lining, the international community is more engaged than ever before. We have seen what would have been unthinkable in the past, very strident. I mean, the beginning of what I think are necessary measures to hold Israel accountable and push for real change. So, I mean, we have to be coordinated, and we have to, in spite of really the demoralizing reality, to be working together, to be thinking creatively, to be expanding the community of people working for human rights, and that eventually together we can actually make change.
Thank you, Jessica. It's helpful to end on a more positive note, and so we're really grateful again for you being with us today and for the work of HaMoked. We did put in the chat if you're interested in learning more about their work and signing up for their updates, please visit their website, and you can do so. We look forward to folks joining us for the next session of our mini-series. It's linked in the chat, but we will focus on, what's happening with the Cassia family in the Al-Mahor Valley, and that will be October 21st, so a week from today. And we encourage you all to join and share that with folks within your network. Again, this will be recorded, and so you can, again, also share that with folks who were not able to join us live. Again, thank you, Jessica, for being with us and for the work of HaMoked. We look forward to our continued engagement, and again, grateful for all of your work. So goodbye, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.